This is RJ Bell, and we're lucky to have with us this week Vegas legend Lenny Del Genio. Lenny, tell us a little bit about your history with Las Vegas.
Well, I'm one of the very, very lucky ones. I've been here since February of 1967. Johnson was president.
Okay,
You got to go
right.
back into ancient history.
Nixon wasn't even president yet.
No, he had been vice president under Eisenhower, but he was gone.
There we go. There we go. Tricky
It was
thinking.
fun. It was the desert. There was no one here. You could do almost anything and get away with it.
So how many people were in town at that point?
There were 80,000 people in downtown Las Vegas, maybe 100,000 including Clark County. It was
Amazing.
nothing.
Yeah, yeah. And how? Oh, now what was the strip like at this point?
But there were about 6 joints on the strip. They had just opened Caesar's Palace. Caesar's Palace was absolutely wonderfully unique. It brought in all the East Coast people that I'd grown up with. It was a fun time. The only bad thing in the beginning was my wife hated it.
And why was that?
Well, you got to remember I married a French woman back in '65. We're driving over the dam. We're coming down the hill. As we're coming down the hill, I had told her, you see all of those little shacks there? Those are the miner shacks. This is Las Vegas. She started crying. It was desert. It was windy. It was brown. And there were no people there.
Now, what brought you were about early 20s at the time?
Yeah, I was 22. I had just gotten out of the military. They had said, Lenny, you need to go west for your health, your lungs. And that's what we did. We
So
came
what
out
made
here.
you pick Vegas over Los Angeles or whatever?
Well, there was, I had a cousin that was in town, and he told me there were plenty of jobs, not to worry, and I could live with him with my 3-month-old baby boy, my MGB, and my French wife.
Okay, sounds like the beginning of a joke.
It is a beginning of a joke. It was on him because there was no job.
Okay.
My wife hated being in with another family, and I started out as a keno writer, writing keno tickets with Chinese writing brush and ink.
All right, so at this point, were you historically a batter? Did you love sports? What?
No, I'd been a sports enthusiast. I'd played sports, everything from running track to basketball to football at college. I was 34-inch waist, as you can tell now. It's been a good life. 34-inch
You're not
waist,
starving.
50-inch chest. I was an athlete with bad lungs, and
So you were a fan, but you weren't a batter yet at that point.
no, my family had all been involved in one of two things. They were either priests,
Okay.
policemen, 3 things, and the rest were bookmakers and loan sharks, to be honest.
So you were familiar with the life.
Yeah, I was kept at a distance from it, but I was not unfamiliar with, and I'm Italian. You got to understand.
Now, where did you come from? Where'd you grow up?
Well, I grew up part of the time in Harlem, in New York, and then in Westchester County.
Okay, cool. All right, so you hit town. What was your first experience on the sports betting side?
There was no sports betting. There were just race bets. You could walk into, they had the old, if you go back and look at the Sting and that scene where the guy is calling the race over the wire.
Okay.
There was a race wire coming in. That's what happened. There were some sports, but it was really minimal because there was an excise tax of 10% on any wages that you bet in sports. And that pretty much eliminated a lot of action from happening.
Okay, so you're saying if you put $100 on it, if you won or lost, they took out 10 to start with?
Yeah, well, the operator of the book had to pay $10 to Uncle Sam. It was a federalized
on the action.
On the action.
So that meant that what were they forcing you to lay 120 just to make
No,
up for that?
it was still 110, but they were booking and they were booking small.
Yeah, doesn't think there'd be any profit there.
No, and you couldn't have a race and sports book in a major property. It had to be a standalone building.
Now I know that in casino they talk about how Ace Rothstein was the first guy to figure out, hey, let's bring the book in-house, and that was supposedly the Stardust in the late 70s, right? But are you saying it was actually regulatory? You weren't allowed?
No, you were not allowed initially, and people didn't want to put it in because of the tax implications. So what happened was Senator Cannon, who was senator here at that time, put through a bill that we now pay less than 1%, it's point something on a bet. So you could absorb that into the VIG. You could absorb that in the betting PC.
So you're saying one of the first keys to sports books becoming more prevalent was the reduction of the tax by a significant margin.
Yeah.
Now, when did it change that books were able to actually go into the properties of the casinos?
That was really, the Stardust was the first major sports book on the Strip, and that's when they started coming in. To be competitive then, you had to put one in.
Okay, so really it was like there was none.
Then
Ace did it with the Stardust. Now, what year was that about?
In the mid-'70s.
And then eventually it became like everyone wanted to do that.
Yeah, you had to. There were limos lined up at every hotel to take your high-end players to wherever the sports book was. And at that time, it was the Stardust. So Caesars was running people down to the Stardust on Saturday and Sunday to bet college and NFL football.
So really, that's something that a lot of the viewers probably don't know, and you can tell me your perspective. Sports books don't make a ton of money for the books, even back then, today, ever. It's usually almost a loss leader, though they're not losing, but they know their big players with the tables and stuff want to bet sports, and if they can't do it there, they're not going to play blackjack if they can't go make a bet.
Absolutely. Competition drives Las Vegas. The reason the people see the Las Vegas today is because of the competition. There was no thought about putting in books because you had to. Your neighbor had it, and you better have it, otherwise your high-end play was gone.
And we're going to do another video and talk about your history as a sportsbook director, and we'll really touch base about your relationship as a sportsbook director with the head honchos of the casino, because I think that's going to be surprising for a lot of people. Okay, so what was next for you on the sportsbook side?
Well, I was lucky enough to meet a man named Phil Hannafin, who was running Summa Corporation, which was Howard Hughes' properties. And he said, Lenny, I know you. He'd been a Keno writer when he put himself through college up in Reno. So he said, Lenny, what do you think about going and putting in parlay cards? And I started out by putting in parlay cards with a secure back end where we microfilmed everything. Because at that time, as of today, everybody was afraid of the ripoff.
Okay.
And that was the key. So he knew I was honest, and he knew that I knew enough about the sports at that time. And that's how I started out.
So you were doing data entry where there was the handwritten cards.
Oh, yeah.
You were entering the information into the computer.
Yeah, actually I had four people, 3 lovely women and a young man.
And what sounds like another joke.
It is.
What property was this?
That was at the Frontier.
Okay, so that was your first job. Okay, now let's just back up real quick. Before it went into the books, before the sports books went into the casino, there used to be standalones that were, some were bigger than others. What was the biggest standalone at the time?
Well, there was the Rosebowl. There was, Austin was running a joint across the street from the Rosebowl. Downtown there were 2 or 3. None of them can compare with anything we have today. They were really out of the 30s, out of the back room of the deli where you grew up, where they were booking. They had moved those top operations to standalone areas, actually where the Mirages today had 2 books on it. Leroy's downtown today is gone, but it's a big corporation there.
So Leroy's with Vic Salerno, who runs that. Way back when in the 70s, he was having the standalone shops.
Yeah, his father-in-law actually started that business, and at that time Vic was a dentist from Long Beach, and he was a bettor. He was involved in sports, but his father-in-law started to become ill and losing some money, and he didn't trust his relations to run the property properly, and Vic came in and ran it and changed the industry because he brought in a whole different mentality. He was computer savvy, he was well educated, and it changed the way a lot of the things that we do now.
Yeah, and right now Leroy's has like 80 properties in town where if there's a smaller casino that doesn't want to run their own book, they do a turnkey and they'll run the book for them.
Yeah, and it saves the profit and loss because they couldn't afford to take the hits when you run 4 weeks where the favorites cover and you get stiffed pretty well by the public.
Now that you bring up a good point is if you go into the Mirage and make a bet, no matter how big the bet is, you know you're going to get paid.
Absolutely.
With these standalones, who was backing these?
Well, to be quite honest, the reason that a couple of them closed is because there was a robbery or embezzlement or a past posting, all in the same time frame, and they didn't have funds to go forward. At the time, the bonds that were required were minuscule, and there wasn't enough money to pay people. So even people like Sonny Reizner got stiffed.
Okay. Now, when you say past posting, and you mentioned the sting, that'd be an example where, because the information wasn't instantaneous to the second, there'd be a disconnect between like a horse race happening,
Sure,
and they would actually be times where people would run a scam where the race had happened, they would bet the result, and the person taking the bet.
Yeah.
So explain that real quick.
yeah, well, let me give you an example of how it happened on halftime wagers. The game was over. They knew what the halftime line was. They had taken bets to it. They were simplex clocked time stops. They knew which clock wasn't working. You went in, if you were one of the guys, they let you bet the halftime line. They would lose $100,000 on the halftime line because everybody that they allowed bet the halftime at the end of the game.
Okay.
That's I don't know if there's anything more fun than that.
I can even, you know how the touts in the newspapers and stuff say 70% winners and all that stuff, which we all know you can't do.
Impossible.
If you let me bet after the game, I could hit over 7.
Yeah, they did very well. Be quite honest, and those places got hurt. And also with parlay cards. They would wait until the end of the results, fill in a parlay card, and hit it.
Now, when I talk to the guys that's been around since the 70s, the stories usually revolve around the scams that you're talking about. Now there's so many cameras, so many computers, and I'm sure that guys who are super advanced can still scam the system. But back then there was I'm kind of asking you, there seemed to be so little checks and balances that really the fear of what the mob would do or the owners of the casino, quote unquote, would do if you scammed them was the main deterrent. Would you say that was the case?
That was a deterrent. I don't know if it was the main deterrent. I'll give you a quick story that involves me and my friends.
Is the statute of limitations up on it?
It wasn't cheap. Although it was betting good information. One of the guys' cousins was a jockey, and he was the owner of 4 or 5 horses. They prepped those horses, and they were ready to run. And they were running either in Atlantic City or in Philadelphia at the Philadelphia track. These horses went off at 99-1 and came in second. We would coordinate our watches in front of the Frontier. Everybody would go to the out-of-the-way books. By then, MGM had a book, Caesars had a book, and so did Stardust, and then the standalones. We'd coordinate our watches. We'd go to all of the places, and we'd steam those horses. We made, for us, we made $5,000, split 17 ways, but it was still money. But everybody did that. That's the kind of thought processes that everybody did.
So where was the edge at? Was this past posting?
Well, no, it wasn't past posting. The edge was that we knew from a reliable source that was blood related that horse A was ready to run and was set up against horses that probably weren't ready to run.
Okay.
Now, what we didn't know in one of those instances, that somebody else had figured out how to do the same thing. And those horses came in first and second.
Now, real quick, because we're going to have to take a break. With the standalone books, were they into the mutual pool at that point?
There were no mutual pools. You were booking out of pocket.
So they were betting off of the track odds. Yeah. So those 99-1s might have had a ton of action around town, but it didn't affect the payout.
No. Well, they only paid track odds on the first $20. Then they prorated it down. But in material, they got taken pretty good. And they would yell, from that time on, when we would go in a book, they'd yell, "Hey, watch out, here comes the steam." And they knew exactly what we were doing.
I wish they said that when I walked in the bar.
It really was the wild, wild west.
All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to pick up in 1980. We're going to call this the 70s and before. We'll pick up in 1980 with Lenny Del Genio. Great stuff. We'll be right back.